Hey, folks, this is the Church Safety Guy, and you are live streaming our Church Safety and Security Facebook Live uh, episodes at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Sunday evening. Um, Paul Buckner and I set this up as an opportunity to talk to you guys about things that come up with church safety and security, and then also have a little bit of fellowship and kind of enjoy our time chatting with you all and maybe answering some questions on a few topics that you're looking for input and wisdom on. What wisdom we can impart. So we started using the StreamYard software, and part of the reason that we use that is because it allows us to bring in almost seamlessly now allows us to bring in folks that we can interview and talk to. And so if you are new to the Facebook Live thing, all you need to do, just as a quick reminder, is go ahead and click on the link that pops up the live, and then it'll ask you for permissions. So you can give StreamYard permissions, and then what happens is it pops up in our feed and it tells us, hey, we're live streaming, and we can see who it is that's actually posting topics and questions and that sort of thing. So the other thing, if you wouldn't mind doing, I'm just adjusting the volume on my my screen so I don't get feedback. So the other thing, if you would just state your church name and where your church is located, because with the Facebook algorithms, that gives us the opportunity to actually expand. And what happens is when you post where you're from, all of your friends actually see, oh, okay, he's on this Facebook Live, and then they kind of can kind of ask questions, and then Facebook takes that and kind of throws some church safety info at them too. So we kind of grow that way. But as far as that goes, this evening is going to be kind of probably kind of quiet, and maybe we'll definitely be respectful of your time, and we'll get done a little bit earlier than we typically do tonight. I have Jim Howard will actually be joining me, and we'll chat with him. I do see him hanging out in my broadcast studio here, so I'll bring him in just a second. I'm not sure if Paul will be joining us today because he's had some cold issues and sinus things, and so with that, he said, I'm having a hard time even talking, so I'm not sure that that I'll be able to do that. So, and I apologize in advance if I have any issues, because I've been fighting something off and I'm coughing nonstop here. So, but what I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk about how to prepare your church for the holidays, and talk a little bit about some safety tips and good best practices for that sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll open up with a word of prayer, and then we'll get going with the conversation with Jim. So if you join me real quick. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the opportunity that we have to gather together. Lord, just ask that you bless this time. I know we're entering a season where many are asking questions, and Lord, I just ask that you would give us the wisdom to help guide those that are looking for you, towards you, and just protect and keep us safe as we do that. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I am going to go ahead and bring Jim in here. Hey, Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good.
Cool. So hopefully we can actually have a conversation this time without any Facebook and technology issues.
This is pretty cool right here. I'm impressed with it. So,
Yeah, last week Paul and I used it, and I was actually able to stream some video, which was really cool. So we kind of like watched some video of one of the trainings that we did at my church, and it was really cool to actually be able to pull it up on my screen and kind of show some folks some actual things that we did. So I think at the moment, fortunately, this is a free software, and so I'm very thankful for that, because most softwares that do this are not. But I'm thinking at some point, hopefully, we'll continue to be able to use it for everything that we use it for, and it'll at least give us a platform for doing interviews and that sort of thing.
Well,
So
I mean, that's the cool part about it is that if you can use it for interviews, because we'll have to look into it also.
yeah, it seems to be working great. The only thing that I've noticed with it is it doesn't go back and forth with Facebook that great. So if somebody doesn't click on like accept permissions on the Facebook side, then when you're looking at it like from the broadcast side, it'll pop up and it'll say Facebook user Charleston, South Carolina, Seacoast Community Church, but it doesn't tell me who it actually is. Um,
Uh-huh.
but if you accept the permissions, then it'll pop up and it'll tell me like Dave Johnson just posted your video is clearer than last week. So thanks, Dave. I hope it is. I've actually I went back when this software was not working well. I went back to the company because they were still in some of the beta testing stages, and they made some suggestions. One of the suggestions they had said was actually hooking my computer up to directly to my router, and so I've done that, and so hopefully I'm getting just a little bit better feed. Um, it seems to be working okay. So, but so yeah, so we had the Southern Gospel group, the Ball Brothers, at our church today, and we ended up having probably about probably about 1,400 people in attendance for that. And so one of the things that I always do is whenever we have especially a music group, I like to go up to them and talk to them ahead of time, off the beaten path, and I'll say, hey, have you guys had any threats lately? Is there anything that concerns you that on social media that we should be concerned about? And it was kind of an interesting conversation because a lot of times people will kind of laugh when I say that, and it's like, you get the proverbial, "Oh, that's cute." I'm so what a death threat? Yeah, okay, Pat. It's like pat pat pat. Thanks for bringing up something that's not serious, but okay. And it was interesting because one of the singers who I know probably better than some of them actually said to me, he's like, he turned his head a little bit and he said, "So what type of threats do you mean?" And I said, "Well, have you ever had a death threat? Have you ever had a threat where somebody said that they were going to follow you or try and intimidate you or something like that?" And he said, what's interesting, he said, is, and they tour a lot with some of the other, probably better known gospel groups like the Gaithers, the Martins. Um, I'm sure some of the folks I've listened to the Gaithers, I think, for the last 35 years. But one thing was interesting. He said, we do tours with those folks. And he said, those folks actually get death threats all the time. He said, in the 14 years that we've been doing this, he said, we've been fortunate enough and blessed enough to never have a threat or never have anything come up that was really serious. And so I said to him, I'm like, you know what? That's great. Praise the Lord that you've never had to deal with that sort of thing. Um, but it kind of shocked me when he started mentioning some of the other groups and saying, well, yeah, like the Gaithers, for example, they get concerns all the time where they go, where people are seeing their ministry and commenting on it and saying, hey, you better watch what you're doing and all this stuff. And it really kind of just stuck out in my head that, again, to emphasize the importance of church safety, a lot of times we kind of get met with the idea that it's not really important, or it's kind of like an afterthought. And and I think it was 2 weeks ago, Paul mentioned, that just the idea that with social media and the ability to reach out to people and to follow people on a closer basis, it's kind of given people a lot of keyboard strength, for lack of a better word, from the standpoint of just being a little bit more aggressive and more daring with how they're approaching that type of thing.
Well, just to comment on what you said there, we had Lee Strobel, who wrote The Case for Christ,
sure,
and wrote the Case for Faith, come to our church. And one of the things that I did, I went out and you look at his Amazon reviews, and I looked at those who had posted the 1s instead of the ones who had posted the 5s.
Mm-hmm.
Because what struck me was that those that posted like 5s would say, hey, inspirational book, really enjoyed it. You might have 1 or 2 people that would post a good sized post on it about the strength and weaknesses of the book. But when you went to the 1s, there were pages written under the 1s of these people that did not like him. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I started doing, looking at these 1s that just really, the venom that they, spewed on him, was to look and see if any of them were close to our area. Because, if you can kind of figure out where these people are and they're local, and mm-hmm. Strobel's in town, then they may show up on your doorstep just to create a problem. So, we look at their, when I go into a church, I look at their social media. I look at their Google reviews, because you'll be surprised. In fact, we found a church that had a guy that posted things about satanic worship being done inside the church, which is what you don't want posted, in your Facebook or your Google reviews.
Sure.
And when you read more of his posts, because he was on Facebook, he said that, and this was right after Parkland, that he felt that if bullies continued to do what they were doing, that they had every right to go into a school and kill as many people as possible. And then further on down in his page, he started talking about police officers were, taking away our rights. So dead police officers mean more rights. And I contacted our local sheriff's office here and, did screenshots and saved this for them and sent it over to them to have them go and talk to this guy. So when you have a high profile person coming into your church, you kind of want to know a little bit about them. I think that's a wise question to go and ask, have you had threats against you? I think you're just doing your intelligence work, where, they may look at you and say, yes, we have this person that's been coming around all the time, and here's a picture of them, and now you pass it out to your team. So I commend you. That's for people to think that we may be a little sensitive. Once you become popular, once you become famous, you have to worry about things like this.
I think it's interesting, and that's really cool that you brought up the idea of the Amazon reviews, because I hadn't, honestly, I use those all the time, but I've never thought to go back and look at, okay, is there a connection between who's saying something there and then, maybe this person has a social media account that they're using as well.
Right.
And that's a very sharp idea, because, a lot of times we don't think about that, about where, you log in one place for everything to try and remember passwords and try not to forget stuff. But at the same time, it kind of gives some stuff away. But we've had situations too where folks, and we watch it rather closely now, but we've had situations in the past where our Facebook group for our church, people have posted things on there as well. And people have gotten into or tried to get into arguments with different pastors at our church. And in our folks have handled it very well through time. And it's commendable. I mean, they've said different things like, what, if you'd like to swing by the church, I'd be happy to sit down and and chat with you and talk to you about this, that, and the other thing. And we had a situation a few years ago where in our area, our neck of the woods, there was a group of state senators and also several judges and a county commissioner, and they would go on a circuit. They would travel a circuit to different churches. And it was just kind of like their community outreach thing. They were all believers, but they would go out and they made this choice to visit all these churches, but they never had like a security team, security detail, or anything like that. They were just kind of doing it on their own. And I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, they came to our church, and we had an individual the previous Sunday actually make comments and not really threats, but comments where he needed to talk to the senior pastor. And almost to the point where it was throwing red flags up, because he was like, hey, I need to talk to this pastor. I need to get him information. I need to do this stuff. And he started dropping words like freedom and, you guys believe in freedom. You believe in your Second Amendment rights. And he was pulling out all of these catchphrases that kind of, it was just odd conversation. Like, okay, he's randomly pulling this stuff out. So I happened to actually come across, and I kind of think it was providential for us, but I happened to come across a section with CNN where CNN was talking about domestic terrorism. And one of the things that they had commented on was this group in the U.S. and I'm forgetting their name at the moment, but their whole premise is resisting authority, and in that time frame. And I still see things pop up every once in a while, but a lot of times they go to churches and they talk to churches about trying to get them to convert to their ideology.
Right.
So they know, if we drop these words like, freedom and conservatism and all this stuff, that, this church will be interested in kind of helping us. And so we did a little bit of background. This gentleman actually left his information at our church, and we did a little bit of background on him, and we found out that he had been I want to say 4 or 5 time convicted felon. And I mean, had a rap sheet longer than, your arm and my arm put together. And one of our officers said, you know what, I don't really think this is the individual that we want hanging around the church when we have a bunch of state senators coming next week.
Sure.
So we ended up actually, we called the gentleman. We kind of arranged a time where our pastor could talk to him on the phone. And, the pastor just said, look, we really don't want you to come back. I'm not trying to be rude, but we just don't support political types, groups and that sort of thing. And so fortunately for us, the gentleman actually listened. And so we went through the process of trespassing him that way and just saying, we're not crazy about politics. We try and stay away from it. But we ended up in that particular service, and he never showed up, thankfully, but we ended up having an officer dispatched. Like the city actually had an officer hang out, on our property because of, the history with this guy. And, when I think about that a lot of times, and, a lot of times I joke around with folks about, safety and security team and how effective we are and that sort of thing. And to me, the I don't know, the pinnacle of effectiveness is if you can handle a situation like that when, nobody knows what's going on. Like nobody knows the whole story. They just know, okay, you're taking care of whatever it is, and and we trust that, and that's fine. And the whole thing, I mean, we managed to get through the whole thing, and nobody really batted an eye, because they're like, well, sometimes we have cruisers parked out in our parking lot. That's a
Right.
normal
Yeah.
thing. They like hanging out and doing paperwork.
Yeah. Well, we hire them for traffic, so
Sure.
they see them out there all the time. It's not anything unusual. You
Right.
know, in fact, it's kind of like this time last year, we had a really bad attack on our church because we had a new pastor that came in, and it's like, a new head coach. They come in and
Sure.
they want to change things up, and so half the congregation left, and it was kind of one of these things where they were bitter, angry. So if you were to go and look at our reviews, like we have a 4.5, and some of the stuff that's on there, it's just foul. I mean, it's really, they talk about. I'm looking at one right now. It says the man is evil and totally wreaked havoc in so many lives. He has inflicted spiritual and emotional abuse.
Hmm.
And this is how, like, our church responds. We thank you for taking the time to fill out a Google review. We regret and are sorrowful that you had a bad experience with Generations Christian Church or the staff that God has called to serve here. We understand the church is not comprised of perfect people, but a group of people serving and walking toward a perfect king. May God bless you and bring you peace. That's all you got to do. You need to
Sure.
have some sort of response. In this church where this guy had written about the satanic worship and the different things like that, the church didn't respond to it. And that to me is, you're kind of like asking for
Hmm.
more. If you respond the way like we do, which is just kind and considerate and things like that, you've got a response out there,
Yeah.
but not to respond to this person may drive them to do even more. You're not hearing me, you're not listening to me. Kind of like what you were talking about, the guy wanting to talk to the pastor. He
Sure.
continuously did that until finally somebody said, okay, let's do this over the phone. But,
Sure.
it doesn't matter what church. We had a church that was honoring first responders, and they had some guy that came up on their Facebook page and said all policemen are murderers and killers. Well, they contacted me because they were getting ready to have this service. And I went over. I love Facebook because it allowed me to go and look at this guy's profile, which, I found he's up here. We're in the Tampa Bay area, and
Sure.
he was from the Pensacola, the Panhandle area,
Right.
and Florida's an open state, so you can go out and search their arrest files, and
Hmm.
there he was. He'd been charged with assault before. So we printed out his picture and posted it to all the safety team members so that they would have a picture of him in case he showed up on the property. But
Yeah.
we're under constant attack. We just, and like I talked about tonight, we just have to be really careful during this time frame
Sure.
because of it being Christmas and of it being, one of our, we have our creasters, the ones that come at Christmas and Easter. So we're going to be overflowing with people, and to hurt a church right now by any type of extremist of any type, is just, kind of a credit to their cause. It's very, it's concerning. This is the time of year where it concerns me. I mean, we're always watching for the threat, but
Yeah.
now we have to be on. I feel like we have to be on a higher alert because of just the time of year. We're a little fortunate down here in Florida. Okay, it's 72 degrees, and I think it's like 32 up there. So we don't have the big coats coming into our church.
Right.
If the person walked in with a big coat on, they're immediately, what we call an anomaly, and we're going to figure out who they are. But you're
Right.
up there where people are wearing bulky clothes and could easily bring a weapon into the church. So, it is concerning.
There's and honestly, I mean, there's not a whole lot to that you can really do about that. Honestly, I was talking to a guy tonight, and we had a situation. I think it was a couple years ago, about the same time, where somebody plopped down in one of our back pews. And he, as he sat down, a gun fell out of his pocket onto the chair next to him. And then, sorry, I'm taking my mic off here. I'm getting feedback. But yeah, a gun fell out of his pocket onto the chair, and it was a revolver, like a 38 Smith revolver. And then it rolled from the pew or the chair onto the floor. So you can imagine now this was during the music portion of our service. So it didn't really garnish much attention except from those immediately in that aisle that all of a sudden, all of a sudden they're like, holy cow, what's, you just dropped a gun. So the gentleman jumped up and put it back in his pocket. And he said, I'm going to go use the restroom. So he jetted out and went to the restroom, and one of the guys that had been sitting next to him kind of popped up and came and grabbed me and told me what had happened and said, he's in the restroom. Well, we actually followed him. He went in the restroom for a second. By the time I got there, he had actually left the building. And I think part of it was because he was so embarrassed about, what happened that he went and did that. But, today when we had our sanctuary almost full before the service started, I pulled myself away and I'm walking up and down the aisles looking at bags and we had a few that church members had brought in, and usually what we do is if we search them, we will put a blue tag on them, like a neon blue tag. But I walked up and down each aisle and I'm like looking under seats and looking at alcoves and, okay, what's this? Is this a lunch bag? What's all of this stuff? And it's really gotten to the point where anymore, honestly, you have to do that. You have to be watching for that sort of thing, because you never know what somebody's going to do or what somebody's capable of. And
no, and they can look like anybody.
Yeah.
I was talking last week about the Run, Hide, Fight video that Houston had shot. And of course they had this guy that's dressed in all black and looks like Vin Diesel, coming into a building that is a workplace that everybody is dressed in, like work casual clothes, professionals. And this guy in, all dressed in black with black sunglasses and a black backpack. And like I said, he's Vin Diesel's stunt double, I'm for sure. And you watch, but in the Christmas setting, in what we're looking at, these people, if it's a terrible time of year, if there's suicidal thoughts, if they're angry with their spouse, and we don't know about it inside the church, they have not given us a heads up that, hey, I'm having problems, at home, then you might even know them, when they show up. So it's sometimes very hard. Now, I just wanted to say this one thing. Our church has this thing of where we have like 3 songs, and then we have our communion, and then we do our offering. And then we do this meet and greet where we stand up and shake hands with somebody, in our area. Well, I have my team members that if they see somebody they have never met before or might make them feel a little bit uncomfortable, to get over there and meet that person, just to shake their hand and get a feel at that moment in time to whether or not maybe we need to put a little more emphasis on this person. Maybe we need to have somebody sit next to them while the service is going on. So, that's one of the things that we train on. I want to make sure that anybody that walks into our church is touched multiple times. And it's just, we have to be that way. We just really do, because if we take a step back and we do not go out and greet these people, it could be the one that we missed. I worry about that morning. When we have people that sit by themselves, do not participate in the service. They might not sing the songs. They might not stand when other people stand. They might do these different things like that. Then I really want the guys to go over and just shake their hand, not say, hey, I'm Jim Howard with the safety team. What seems to be your problem here, pal? But go over and talk to them and just get a feel at that moment in time whether or not we should be having somebody in the general area of that person. So, like I said, it's just something that we've started putting into play.
And that, honestly, I mean, you hope that everything turns out okay, that there's no additional red flags,
Right.
but if
Right.
there isn't, then that gives that person the blessing and you the blessing of being able to minister to them, right? So,
Sure.
you have the opportunity to maybe reach out and touch somebody, on a different level, and just be gracious to them.
Well, and in our law enforcement training, one of the things that they always told you, make eye contact and speak to them. That puts
Right.
it on a personal level. So when you're doing this at a church, you're also doing the same thing. You put this person on notice that you have noticed them.
Right.
And, after the service is over with, if they're a visiting member or somebody that is interested in your church, they may come over and start talking to you because you were the first person that walked over and said hello to them. And so, hey, it may be a future safety team member. You never know. But you have to work the crowd. I mean, that's what I
Sure.
kind of tell them. You have to be out there in the middle of it, because as well as I do that when you walk up to somebody that is a possible threat, you're going to feel it as soon as you get close to them. As soon as you shake their hand, there's going to be something that just the hair stands up on the back of your neck, or you just really feel it.
One of the awesome things about our church, our sanctuary, is that we have a balcony that jets out over, and so I can walk up in the balcony and I can actually look down and see how many people are on Facebook on their phones.
Yeah, I
But
know.
what's crazy to me is every service, whether I'm on the schedule, as a supervisor or not, I always walk up to the balcony and I always stand there for a few minutes, and the folks always know, okay, if he's standing there, don't mess with him because he's doing something. But
Sure.
I've had regular church members come up to me and say, well, why do you stand there and watch people? And I said, because in our haste of running around, we forget that by standing and watching and just stopping, just look at people, look at their body expressions, look at what they're doing with their hands. What are their hands doing? Are they in their pocket? Are they sitting down? Are we in the middle of a worship song where, our worship leader has asked everybody to stand up and they're sitting down with their hands in their pockets and
Sure.
kind of, withdrawn? All of the body language is just so important to look at. And, it's funny, we had a gentleman come in with one of our outreach leaders, and, I didn't get a chance to meet him. I guess apparently he had a pretty rough background, but he decided to start coming to church, and our oversight pastor had met him, and so a couple days later, the oversight pastor comes to me and he says, "Hey," he says, "I want to talk to you about this guy." And I said, "Okay, what's on your mind?" And he said, "Well," he said, "he came up to me and he said he introduced himself. He stuck his hand out. I shook it, and he said the hair on the back of my neck just went up." And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, "Okay." I'm like,
Yeah.
"What? So what happened?" And he said, "Well," he said, "he told me that he had been 4 months free of drugs. He had been drug free." And he said the next thing out of his mouth was, he got saved in prison and that God had really been working on his life. And so I said, I'm listening to this narrative and I'm like, okay, you know what? That's, praise the Lord. God's working in his
Right.
life.
Right.
So what was the red flag that you saw? And he said, well, I'm talking to this guy and I asked him, I said, what, if you don't mind me asking, what did you go to jail for? Like, what were you originally convicted of and sent to jail? And he said, well, he said, I got caught because I was stealing a vehicle. And so the pastor was like, okay, you stole a vehicle and it was in your possession, and he asked him a few questions. It was in your possession. Okay. Yeah, it was recovered. You were arrested. And so the guy says to him, yeah, I stole the vehicle, and I was in jail for 2 years, and I got out, and God saved me. And he kept right on going. He didn't skip a beat. And he's telling me, like, the pastor is telling me the story. And I said, wait a second. I said, if this guy's got a history, I said, red flags should be going up everywhere, because if it was Grand Theft Auto, people don't just get 2 years.
Yeah. There's
So
more to that than that. Yeah.
exactly. So there was this whole backstory. Like, the two of us, as soon as he said that, I looked at the pastor and I said, okay. I said, that makes a lot of sense. And he said, yeah. He said, he said, as soon as the words came out of his mouth, he said, besides the hair on the back of my neck standing up, he's like, as soon as the words came out, I knew he wasn't telling me the whole truth. Like, he had modified the story to make it sound good. And what was interesting was, the icing on the cake was this gentleman had said at the end of the conversation, I'd love to start serving, and let me help with your security team. And I'm just laughing, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, tell me you're not gonna, like, ship this guy to me. And I mean, I was teasing him because I knew he wouldn't do that, but at the same time, I'm like, well, he's like, well, I just want you to keep an eye on him, and let me know, and so I told him, I said, you know what, I'll pass it on. We'll see if we can get a picture of him. I'll show it to some of the other folks, and we'll kind of go from there. And since he hasn't been back, so I'm not really too concerned at this point. But
Right.
the, when you do that stuff, and let me just expand on that a little bit. But when you do that stuff, when you go out of your way to greet people, when you shake their hand, when you look them in the eye, when you look at body language, all of that stuff, you're making yourself a hard target. And
Right.
how many times have we've been pushing that? It's like, people know, the folks, they may know, they might have to guess how serious you are about security, or in their mind they may not know that as a church you've elected to have people carry, and you've got a firearm somewhere. But the reality is, you're going from a soft target to a hard target
Sure.
because you're actually paying attention to what's going on.
Well,
And I mean, that just, it goes to the whole alertness. We teach people, we do classes all the time, and we tell people, be aware of your surroundings, look
mhm,
at what's going on, pay attention,
mhm.
because it's the folks that don't pay attention that get preyed on.
Sure. And I'll tell you a story about a situation that happened at our church, because like I said, it's not only the ones that are visiting. Okay,
Hmm.
it could also be the team member. I mean, it could be members of your church. The guy that, when we first moved down here to Florida, the guy that walked across the street and invited me to church and when I gave my life back to Christ, he just one of my best friends, and he's 6'9", and so when anytime I ever went out, we went out together, and I got to the restaurant first. I'd say, "Hey, my friend's coming. He's really tall, so you'll know who he is, and just bring him over to the table." And of course, the little girl at the door, who's 5'2", thinks that everybody's tall,
Sure.
until we'd be walking him over, and she would go, "Oh my gosh, he's really tall." Yes, but he always sat in the back of the church because he was tall. He didn't want to block
Yeah.
people's view, so he wasn't like paranoid and wanting to send, paranoid and with your back up against the wall, kind of like what we are. But he just sat with his back there because he was so tall. Well, one night he had went through a really bad divorce, and he felt that the church should have done more to help him with the divorce. He really felt like the church should have pulled both of them in and spoken to him. And he was really angry at the pastor. He was really angry at our pastor. So I came in on a Saturday night, and the first thing that I noticed was he was sitting right up on the front row, which was just completely, just something he never did. And so
Sure.
for a second there, I thought maybe he was going to talk. Maybe he and the pastor had had worked things out, and he was going to get up on stage and talk about what he'd been going through, all these things like this. I mean, I was hoping he was going to do a testimony. And I
Mm-hmm.
went with the sheet of the service, and he wasn't listed on it. So the second thing I did was I watched him during offering and communion. Now, when we did communion, the little girl that went up to serve him, it was like her first time. And this is where we teach about atmospherics. She was
Sure.
bouncing down the, rows, handing out the communion thing, just smile on her face, thank you, all these things like this. And she got to him, and he didn't even respond to her. Like she
Mm-hmm.
put the tray out there for communion, and he didn't even look her way. So immediately she thought, what did I do wrong? I mean, her
Sure.
atmosphere changed. And so when she came back, I watched him through offering. He did the same thing again. So I walked down and sat right. There was one seat between the two of us, and
Mm-hmm.
he was so focused on the pastor, he didn't even see me sit down. He was so focused on him. And so we went through the service. The pastor said funny things. People laughed, but not my friend. He wasn't laughing. He just stared intently at the pastor. When the service was over and we stood up, I broke his trance, and he looked over and saw me, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm doing what I always do. I, escort the pastor out of the church." And he goes, "No, I know what you're doing here." And he just stormed out of the church. Well, 20 minutes later, he came back to me and said, "Hey, I apologize." He said, "I was going to get up on stage and make a scene." He said, "I was so angry at, the pastor that I
Right.
was, as service was over with, I was going to get up and get in his face." And he said, "If you had not sat down next to me, I would have done this." And he says, "I'm really sorry." But the reason why I noticed it was because of, when we talk about his baseline at 6'9",
Right.
he always sat in the back. His baseline was he always participated in the services. And
Mm-hmm.
by him not doing that, that alerted us to where we, made an educated guess on it. And we were right that he was up there to cause, an issue. So, like
Yeah.
I said, you have so many people that come into your church, and time frame, uh, during this time frame, you may have people that are going through rough periods. Their first
Sure.
time without their children, their first time of a death, that a person's not there this Christmas, and so those are people that you have to watch. Also, they may need some help. They may need some attention, and these are the types of people that we talk about that we should be servicing as Christians. We should be, witnessing to them. We should be holding their hands as they're going through this.
Sure.
We cannot leave them out by themselves. So we really have to watch those.
The one thing I thought was interesting that you mentioned just now, the atmospheric, the
Right.
whole, and that's something that a lot of times I forget to mention. But what's interesting when you say that is that the individuals that I've seen, that we a lot of times, like, the easiest way for me to explain it to somebody is to say, well, this person's kind of socially awkward, because a lot of
Yeah.
times that kind of overlaps. But the idea that, when you're interacting with that person, it's like a vacuum, like they've got a one track mind and they can't get out of that. And like you said, somebody, your friend, who you used to go out to dinner with them.
Sure.
So,
Today.
if
I mean, so, yeah.
I went out to dinner with somebody, and they sat down next to me, they'd be like, "Hey, James, how's it going?" And all
Right.
this stuff, or at least look over. If the
Yeah.
pastor was preaching, they'd look over and kind of acknowledge. But you picked up on something wasn't right because of how he was interacting with others as well, and
Mhm.
knew from that baseline. We had a gentleman, and I think I mentioned this story at the safety conference that we did a couple weeks ago. But there's a local pastor that I know very well. He actually, before he was called into the ministry, he actually went to my church, and so he got called into ministry and started serving in another church, became one of the associate pastors. And one Sunday, he stood up and he preached against abortion and how abortion was wrong, and went through this dialogue. And 2 weeks later, his family was sitting in the normal area that they sit in, right in the back, away from the stage, kind of in, mixed in with people. And his security team or his safety team watched this guy come in and sit down in the same aisle. And they're like, okay, that's kind of odd, because it looked like he was looking for the pastor to sit next to him. So he's sitting there, and they keep watching him. And they stood up, they greeted each other, they shook hands, everybody sat down. And every time they stood up for a song, for a handshake, whatever, he kept moving closer and closer to the pastor. Like, okay, well, I'm going to scoot down a couple of seats. And the pastor didn't even notice him. Like, he's focused on his family, and and worshiping the Lord and the service. And so one of the safety guys, they're watching him. All of a sudden, the guy pulls out a buck knife out of his pocket, and he's sitting there, and he flips the blade open, and he's messing with it. And they said it was probably about a 4-inch blade. So he's sitting there playing in this aisle with this blade. And so one of the safety guys comes in on the other side and plops down, in the chair that was still open between, the pastor and this guy and his
Yeah.
family. And it wasn't until that happened that the pastor was like, wait a second, why are you, he kind of snapped out of it and said, why are you, sitting over here by me? And as soon as he sat down, another safety guy came from the other side. And so both of them were sitting next to this guy. And the one that was on his right side was actually a SWAT officer for the city of Columbus. And so he said, he kind of leaned over to him, and I guess the guy had tried to, like, as soon as people sat down, he tried to shove the knife back in his pocket. And so the officer said to him, identified himself. He said, hey, I'm Officer so-and-so, Columbus Police. I need you to come with me right now. And so he kind of grabbed his arm, and, the two guys escorted him out. Well, they said it took him probably 10 or 15 minutes. They called the local police to come, and they said 10 or 15 minutes of talking to the guy. The guy wouldn't say a word to them about anything. They said, why are you moving over towards this guy? What's the deal? They were questioning him. And finally, the guy breaks down, and he says, he said, the reason, they said, well, we know what you were doing. We know you were trying to get to him. So why? Just tell us why. So the guy says, he says, he finally broke down, and he said, he said 2 weeks ago, he preached against abortion.
Right.
And they were like, okay, why does this matter? Why do you care? And so he said, my fiance 2 years ago had an abortion before she started coming to this church and before I met her. And he's like, I just could not believe that he would take that stance against my fiance. And, and that's, at that point, they're like, okay, well, there's the motive. You can sit there and you can say, well, I wasn't really planning on doing anything, but, you had a 4-inch blade in your hands, and your actions, you're moving towards this guy. So, yeah, there's a little bit of an intent there. So,
well, I mean, there's more than an intent. There's almost an actual try. I mean,
sure.
It's not. Why would you pull out this knife in the middle of the church? I mean, that's like the guy dropping the gun in the church.
Yeah.
This isn't this isn't a good sign here. You anytime you want to fire up your church and find out who doesn't really like the church, speak about being against abortion. Talk about being pro-life, and you'll see. I get call after call after call from churches that take a stance on pro-life, and they say people go nuts, inside. So you don't know. You just truly don't know. That's a scary situation. I tell people I'd rather be shot than stabbed. So to even sit down next to a guy with a knife, I probably would have stood behind him, and I just don't like being around knives. So
a lot of, often, and it's funny, we've kind of gotten to a better place now, but often I spent a great deal, and for those of you that are maybe with smaller churches and whatnot, one of the biggest, greatest things that we did when we were starting out was actually communication, where I would go to the pastor and I would say, hey, help me out here. Tell me what you're preaching on for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Like, is it a series? And that communication to me was invaluable, because if I knew that it was a topic that could raise a lot of feathers, I would say, okay, on this particular day, we need to have a few more folks in the crowd kind of watching stuff. And again, sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's frustrating, because you're always on high alert, right? You're always trying to pay
Right.
attention. So
Right.
some days it's higher than other days. But what's interesting is, it's for our church, it's developed a culture where a lot of times the senior pastor, if he's preaching, he will text me now. And this is years after we've been running successfully and doing well, but he'll text me and he'll say, hey, I'm just giving you a heads up, Sunday's topic is a little bit a little bit dicey. We might get a little bit of pushback. I'm not expecting anything, but it's a controversial topic. And I love those texts, not because it's an easy thing to deal with, because it's
Right.
usually a Thursday or Friday night, and I'm like scrambling to get more people on the schedule for Sunday. But the idea that I can at least plan ahead a little bit, and he realizes that not every person might appreciate or might be okay with that topic, just gives me a little bit more time to be proactive instead of reactive with what's going on.
Well, and our pastor is very good about contacting us in case he's getting ready to talk about something like that. I mean, that's a wise move on everybody's part, because we don't know who's sitting in the crowd. We don't know. The person might have just went through their family having an abortion, thinking that they can't be saved, or something like that.
Sure.
That's not what we're preaching. What we're preaching is that we just don't believe in it. But
Right.
those that have had it happen, please come to us, because we really want to love on them. Hopefully, hopefully they've kind of seen the light. They've seen the
Sure.
truth of it. But I was speaking at it's an organization called Women in Charge, and I was talking about how churches are kind of an answer to the mass shootings. We need to be more involved in our children and people at work and the different things. As Christians, we really need to be that light. And I was talking about some of the games that the kids play, like Grand Theft Auto.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a friend of mine, you may have heard of him, Phil Chalmers. He goes around the country teaching about why teenagers kill. And he's really big into the kids who watch these video games. It just desensitizes them, and it promotes killing people and police
Sure.
officers and things like that. And so, he says this is one of those things that if your child is playing this type of game, they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be, really, seriously. If you're a Christian family, or you really care for your children, they should be playing these games. Well, right when I got finished with the talk, this woman stood up and just blasted me. I mean, just my family and my kids have been playing these games for years, and there's nothing wrong with them. And I can't believe you'd push your religion in on us and all these things like that. And the lady that was running the meeting just cut her off, and then said, hey, we really appreciate Jim coming in and talking and all this stuff like this. Well, as they went around the room and did their 30-second advertisement in these business meetings, her thing, her way of living was reading palms and looking at stones about your future. She was a fortune teller. And so right away, I knew why she was upset with me, because I'm talking about Christ, and she's talking about taking a look at your longevity line in your hand, and I'm kind of hurting her business in a sense. So you never know in the crowd when you're talking these things who may, take, exception to what you're talking about, even though it's just as innocent as we possibly can make it. As anytime we bring Christ into the subject, you run the risk no matter where you at, of somebody being against you. So that's something that we have to prepare for. It doesn't look if somebody's we've got a guy right now that's mad at us because the music's too loud. And, he's one step away from being trespassed because he just can't keep his mouth shut. He stands out in the middle of the gathering, where we walk into before we go into church. You might call it a vestibule or something like that. We call it hours of gathering. And he stands there and as the music's playing, he's voicing his opinion about, only Satan can be in that room because the music is too loud and everybody in there is Satan worship. I know. Okay. So we've had to pull him aside a couple of times and kind of said, listen, there's other churches down the street. He was talking about how the Methodist church does this. And I said, then go to a Methodist church. It's a free country. You can go wherever you want.
Sure.
But like I said, anytime, this time last year, like I said, if you were to go and look at our Google reviews, you would see all these nasty things that have been said about our pastor. And I tell you, this is one of the best pastors I've ever worked around. He's very much into the safety team. He's gotten us more than anybody ever had as long as I've been doing this since 2008. I mean, for the last 2 years, a year and a half that I've been working with him, it's been unbelievable. All I got to do is go and ask him what I need, and he's providing it for us. So, and he preaches the word. I mean, he's one of the best preachers I've ever heard. So it's sad that we have to go through this, but you just, like I said, he may be up there preaching about, certain churches believe that baptism has to be a part of your salvation. And just to say that, you see people start to squirm in their chairs. And who knows, the next thing you know, they're saying things on Facebook or creating a habit. Just real quick, because I kind of want, this is something that just happened to us. One of our safety team members, a Marine, who has had some issues, mental issues. We've worked with him a lot. We loved him. I mean, we still love him, and we wanted to help him. But he was sitting in the dentist chair at the VA, and he was depressed, and he said, "I want to kill people." He just blurted out, "I think about killing people." And so the dentist immediately, contacted local law enforcement. And by the time they got there, he had left and went home. And when they went home, he did it again. So we have this thing here in the state of Florida called the Baker Act. If you're a threat to yourself or to somebody else, then they can put you under observation for 72 hours. And so he admitted it again that he wanted to kill people. And then they Baker Acted him. And while they were processing him, he said he had a gun at the church. So, of course, the next thing you know, this agency's at our church, searching our church for this gun. I mean, he had said it was in the safe, and we only had like 3 places that we lock up things. So it was easy to do those. But I can't let him back on the property. He's made these statements and put the church right in the middle of it. It's an unfortunate thing, but I've talked to him on multiple occasions, said, when you get the professional help that you truly need, and I have an opportunity, and I said, I've got to be able to talk to this person to find out if they feel that you are back on the right track. I can't let you come into the church, because now that he has said he wants to kill people, if he were to come into the church and hurt somebody, and we knew about it, we would be in trouble. So, you just don't know, James. You just don't know.
It's hard. We had a situation on a Wednesday night a bit ago, and I'll talk about this real quick, and then I want to ask you a couple of other ministry related questions to wrap up here.
Sure.
But yeah, we had a boy that was about 10 or 11, and his mom used to come to the church, but a neighbor brought him on Wednesday nights, and he was involved in our kids program, and he was special needs. He was a high functioning autistic boy. But he would come in and he would sit and play through the games. And sometimes it was very challenging to know that he had any concerns at all. Mm-hmm. And so one evening, he kind of got really excited and wound up, and he started making comments to the pastor, the family pastor that was actually running the games and running the kids programs. And he starts like physically fighting him, punching him. I mean, it just went. And this pastor is one of the best de-escalators I personally know. I mean, he will sit down and talk with people, and on a whole other level. And so he
Right.
was trying to talk to him, and it wasn't working. And so finally he said, you know what? He said, he called me. He said, hey James, he said, can you help me? We're going to take him back to the neighbor so she can run him home. So I said, okay, sure. So we're walking and down a hallway, and he pulls away from the pastor. The pastor didn't really have his hand on him, was just kind of guiding him. He pulls away from the pastor and then runs full tilt into a plate glass window
Oh my
that
gosh.
was at our welcome center, and hit the, I mean, like he was going to run through it, literally hits the window, bounces off the window, and thankfully like didn't crack it, didn't do anything because it's safety glass, hits the floor, and then he jumps up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what's going on, and the
Right.
the pastor is like, hey bud, calm down, what? So he's like screaming, his eyes are rolling back in his head. He starts kicking the window, and we're like, what are you doing? Stop kicking the window. What, why are you? And so then he goes into, I want to break the glass and I want to cut you with it, and starts going down this whole road of, well, I'm going to, very, very, very explicitly saying, I'm going to take the glass and I'm going to do this to you. And then he turns to me and he says, I'm going to do this to you. And I'm going to sit there and watch, watch you. And he said this to me. He said, I'm going to take this piece of glass and I'm going to slit your throat. And those are the exact words he used. And he said, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to watch you bleed out in front of me on the church steps. And at that point, I'm like, I looked at the pastor and I said, okay, this is a 911 phone call.
Yeah.
Said,
Yeah. Immediately.
we need some backup here. And so, the pastor said, can you call the police? So I said, sure. So the police officer showed up, and props to the police department. I mean, they were literally there within a few minutes. And the officer was a younger guy, and he walked over and he kind of sat down next to the boy, and he starts talking to him. And right away, the boy calms down, kind of starts calming down, and he says, why would you say this sort of thing to, these guys love you. They're trying to help you with, with the program tonight. What's the problem? And he's just, and honestly, I don't even remember what he said, but the officer said, you know what, I'm going to drive you home because I feel like we need to talk to your mom directly. And the backstory of this is we couldn't get a hold of the mom. Like, the neighbor that had brought him was calling and calling and calling. And it had gotten to the point where we're like, okay, we just don't, I mean, we need to connect with a parent. So we're going to take him home, and then the officer can connect with the mom. So eventually, before they left, like within a few minutes before the officer left with the boy, the mom called the pastor. And the pastor said, we just felt like this was the best course of action based on what he was saying. And we would have done the same for any child that had, or any person, that had the same
Yeah.
reaction. So the mom, and I'm not even joking, the mom was like, you know what, that's fine. You do the best you can. You made the right choice. I'll meet the officer. We'll work it out. Well, I get home later that night, and I open up my laptop and I pull up Facebook, and I happen to glance at the church's Facebook account, and this mom went on Facebook and posted probably like 3 pages worth of what she thought had happened, and it was all about how horrible,
Right.
the pastor was, and how would you dare call a police officer for a little boy, and you're shunning, the church is shunning me, and all this stuff. And so I picked up my phone right away, and I called the pastor. Can't get a hold of him, so I called his wife, who's a good good friend of mine, and I said, hey, I said, is what's going on with Dave? I said, I'm trying to get a hold of him, and she was like, oh, he's on the phone with with this lady.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, so you guys saw, the social media and what's going on. And she's like, yeah, she's like, he is trying to talk to her to get her to pull it off. and at least sit down and have an actual conversation.
Right.
And so she ended up actually he talked her down enough that she pulled it off herself, and she wouldn't step foot in the church again, which is sad because, you know, a lot of her, I think she had 3 or 4 kids. Her kids really loved going to the church and were
Sure.
very involved. But there was a lot of things that were happening in the background, like she was trying to get her son to come out of the car one day, and he ended up shoving her. And when he shoved her, she lost her step and fell and broke her arm. And it was enough, it was a serious enough of a situation where I told the pastor, I said, I said, somebody needs to step in with her and sit down and have, a conversation about this, because this is affecting everything. Like, he
Sure.
thinks if it's okay to push his mom around, then maybe it's okay to push you around or me around. But I'm like, I'll never forget that night that, he was sitting there, and I'm like, it wasn't like oh, I want to kill you, I don't like you. It was like a graphic, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to sit here and laugh about it. And I'm like, you know, oh my
Yeah. You can't, first off, nobody's trained inside the church to deal with things like this. I mean, this
God,
isn't, we're not a, counseling office that we know how to handle kids like this. And when you put, I mean, your pastor was smart on calling you, but say, for instance, it wasn't you, but a lady or something like that. He might have physically hurt this lady.
sure,
And we've had situations where we've had special needs students, and we put some of the biggest guys in there because a lot of times they just kind of like got to bear hug them till they come out of what the cycle that they're going through. But this is no way to be putting it on your volunteers. It shouldn't
yeah,
be happening this way. How do we deal with it? I don't know, but I know in our church we probably would not let the lady bring the child back again, because you wouldn't have a volunteer in your children's ministry then, that would want to
yeah.
work there because they'd be afraid of this guy or this child all the time.
Well,
So,
and that's what we do, honestly. I mean, we have, for our special needs kids, we have buddies that will go with them and hang with them
right,
and stuff.
right,
And when I was able to get a hold of the pastor, that's what I said. I almost verbatim what you just said. I said to the
yeah,
pastor, and I said, I know he and I see eye to eye, and I'm like, we see eye to eye. You agree with me, but here's the thing. I'm like, we're not trained for this. And the
no,
fact
no,
that, we can't have him now come back to our church, whether it's a kid or not. I would say the same thing to an adult. You're in my face telling me how you're going to hurt me.
right,
That's, that's life threatening. I don't know you. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know your intent or the value behind your words. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? We just can't have him coming back without him being with his mom. And
sure,
so, we went through, it was kind of eye opening for us, because we got to the point where we said, okay, now how do we handle this? Because we're trying to minister to this family, but at the same time, we need some communication with either a counselor or someone that professionally does this, because that way we can see that, he's not a danger to himself or to the other kids in the ministry. Because,
sure,
and again, I mean, if, just like you said earlier, if something were to ever come back, we would be the two that they would be standing there, in court asking, okay, what did you do to mitigate this
right,
from going somewhere else?
right.
And so,
Escalate.
I mean, I do think it's important, and a lot of the stuff that you and I think have dealt with over the years may seem kind of foreign to some of the smaller churches, but at the same time, you have to, part of wisdom with a safety team is, I think, understanding where the line is, and
Mhm.
knowing at some point, what, I'm not a trained counselor.
Right,
I'm more than willing to sit down with somebody and pray with them and listen to them and counsel them. And I've taken some counseling classes and different
sure.
things. I've been in that role, but at the same time, I can't, I don't have the skill set, um, to sit down and work with somebody through that.
Well, in situations where a person threatens you, we've been trained to meet force on force. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
scary part about this. I commend you that you immediately called 911 because that's exactly what you should be doing. But there's always that fear that if this person does start to do things like that, the only thing that until law enforcement gets there, your only response is to protect everybody, to protect
sure.
yourself, the pastor, the children in the ministry. When you're talking, he's 11. There's other kids inside that area that need to be protected. So it's a very
That's
frightening thing.
Yeah, I mean that in that situation, we pulled him out. We were actually sitting on the front steps of the church, and it was
Yeah,
just the three of us, And
right,
the neighbor came back, and the neighbor comes like walks up to me, and she's a sweet lady, and she's just like, Pat, 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 I'll just drive him home. And I said, you're not driving him anywhere. I
right.
I love you. You're almost like a mom to me. But guess what? I'm
Yeah,
like,
I'm not
you're
putting you
not
in the car
getting
with
in
me first. Yeah,
I'm like, you're not getting in the car with him. I said, where is he sitting? And she said, oh, he sits in the back seat. Okay, no.
yeah. No, no.
I said, do you have somebody else to ride with you? And
Yeah.
she's like, oh, no, he'll be fine. And I said, no. I said, I do not want to get a phone call from your husband saying, why in
You,
the world did you allow this?
and what bothers me a little on this too is that the parents allowed this to happen. Here's
Yeah,
this sweet lady that you're talking about, and they put them with a child that has these episodes where they become violent and could hurt somebody. The parents' responsibility here is that, but that's another story for another day. Anyway, so what's your question, sir?
well, I was just going to ask you in wrapping up, how did your conference go? What are your plans for 2020, and what are you thinking? What is your mindset here?
Well, our conference went really well. We had, like I said, we had Julie Workman there. That she's a survivor from the Sutherland Springs shooting, and her testimony was unbelievable. I don't think there was a dry eye in the church once she got finished. Um, Kevin Smith with Department of Homeland Security was there. We had a liability attorney who talks. His thing right now is to work with churches because you have to understand if you don't do your due diligence, what you're probably going to get sued. But what they're trying to do is shrink your liability on that. If you've prepared or you've put in place a plan, then you're protecting yourself and you're showing that you're trying to do something, that
Right.
it's not one of these things of where you just kind of like what you're talking about, you invite this kid back in and something happens.
Hmm.
So he spoke. We also, there's a new thing coming out that we're kind of warning churches about. In fact, we just talked to a church 2 weeks ago about this. Insurance companies are going to start pushing a thing called active shooter insurance,
Mm.
and where you think that you have a terrorist clause, in your contract, your liability contract. Well, you have to read what that says, and that is actually a terrorist attack. That is not where a disgruntled son-in-law comes into your church and shoots it up. It doesn't cover that at all. So this is just something that's about to start raising its ugly head. We had a couple of churches fill out the application for it, and we found out it wasn't as expensive as we thought it was going to be, but it's still something you need to be thinking about. It's something that, listen, it probably, and this is what the insurance companies are betting on. It'll probably never happen to your church, but if it does, then there's a separate policy for that. Here in Florida, we have a thing called no fault insurance. And that's to where if I don't get insurance, I'm not worried about it.
Yeah.
Then it's something that we have to have. And a lot of people don't get it. And then when they get in an accident and realize that they really needed that part of the policy, then, they're like mad. So if this becomes more and more of an issue, then we're going to be talking a lot more about it. It just really is. For 2020, James, I tell you, this is what we have felt that has worked the most for us. We would love just to be able to travel without having to put a financial responsibility on the churches that we're coming to. But in order for us to do that, we have to have sponsors. And so that's what we're kind of working on right now, is to try to find businesses that are looking for 501c3s that they can get behind and help us out, to where I can come to your area and like tell you, look, get a bunch of churches together and we take a love offering to cover some of the costs, but it's not one of these things where we say, I have to have this amount of money before I can come. We want to try to get the word out as best we can. And like I said, and we've talked about this before, 90% of the churches in the United States are 500 or less. And those are the ones that we really want to work with, because they don't understand that the safety team is their members. All you got to do is do a little training, and once you start to spot the anomalies, the threats, then you can get on the phone and contact 911. Get the troops on the way before something gets worse. And I tell churches that, as a previous law enforcement officer, I would rather you call me and me get there and it not be anything at all, than you not to call me and then it gets out of hand. And so those are the type of things that we like to work with agencies in the area to get them to come in with us, so that we can talk. They're going to tell you what they're going to do in an active shooter, but they're not going to tell you what you need to do inside the church during the active shooter. And that's where we get a lot of our business. We have most of our counties around here go in and teach active shooter what they're going to do when they come in, or they teach you run, hide, fight. It doesn't work for all churches. That post I did last month about run, hide, fight is not made for the churches, has gone nationwide. I mean, it is a conversation that every church needs to have, because if your congregation, it was funny when I was talking to, I think I mentioned this, I was talking to a guy that we're looking at 20% of your congregation is, elderly or disabled. He goes, not in my church, it's flipped. It's like 80% of my congregation is elderly and disabled. So we have to take a different look at it now. We really do, how to handle that. So that's going to kind of be our call for this year, is to talk about this. We're working really hard trying to get law enforcement to kind of come in on this, because Pasco County here teaches the schools alert, barricade, and confront if they have to. And we think that that's what we should be teaching the churches, that you alert people that there is an active shooter, try to get into a room to where you can barricade the doors, and if you have to, you confront. But the confronting should be the safety team members. The safety team members should be the ones that confront the threat, not your 75-year-old lady that has a Bible in her hand and thinks, I can thump this guy. Yeah, she probably can, but what happens after she thumps him and it's over with? He's probably going to hurt her. So, you made mention about the mindset. If you don't have the mindset that you have to fight in this till the end, then you end up getting hurt. I can't tell you how many police officers who have been trained in law enforcement work pull their weapon, fire 2 rounds at a person, thinking that that's it, it's over with, only to have that person to respond by firing back at them. And in their mind, they're thinking, what just happened here? That's not the way it's supposed to be. You have to have that mindset that until the threat is, neutralized, you have to be in there. And I don't want to teach churches that. I don't want to teach the members of the church that's something that us as a safety team should be taking care of and should be focusing on. So, we're really excited about 2020. This year was we ran into we signed up to work with an attorney's office and thought we were going to be doing great things, and all they wanted to do was get our material. And once they got our material, they cut us. And so 2 things happened out of it. I have to look at the silver lining in it. The first thing was that we got all of our material written up in books. I mean, my training material is now in books. If you go to our website, you can pull down the PDFs, and we're going to put more of those out there. So that was a good thing that happened, because they are our material. And the second thing is that we saw the business plan that we should be working on, and it was their business plan. So God really had a reason for that, and He got us out before we got too deep into these guys, and really got hurt. So that kind of threw it's Satan. We know that we're doing God's work, and so Satan kind of threw us a little bit of a bump in the road. But other than that, we didn't. We just kind of got up, dusted ourselves off, said, "Thank you, Lord," and let's keep going. So that's kind of what we're doing. I'm going to be up. I know you're not close, but I'm going to be up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I'm hoping. I got to go back and look at my calendar, but I'm hoping it's in the warm time, because I went up there a year ago in March and it wasn't warm. So
No.
I'm thinking it's April or May that I'm going to be back up there, and
They may be unthawing by
yeah.
then.
My wife is from that area. I've been there. I went one Christmas. It snowed 9 of the 10 days we were there. I said never again. It was 23 below wind chill, so it takes 23 degrees before it gets to zero.
Right.
Come to Florida, we have 72-degree weather here now.
Well, my wife and I actually went to college in Dubuque, Iowa. So for a good piece of that 4 years, I think a year of the 4 years we lived in Wisconsin, right across the border. And yeah, I can remember, 32 below zero, and that was before the wind chill. There were a couple of days where I couldn't, you'd go out to try and start your car, and it's like, yeah, right.
Well, I really appreciate those that are up north, taking care of our country up there, but I'm not coming. So, I try to. I went to Zion, Illinois twice up there, and worked with a church up there. And the first time we went, it was like in April, and they were telling us, "Oh, it's beautiful weather here." It was so cold. It was just funny, but like I said, I hope that we get out a little bit more. It's all God. I'm just going to say that over and over and over again. I've got enough work in this area to keep me busy all the time. Because, like I said, we network churches.
Sure.
That's something you really need to be working on right now, is to network churches in your area. It does not matter what. Look, it doesn't matter what flavor you are: Baptist, Methodist, non-denominational, Catholic. You need to be sharing information. And we've started doing that, and that's where we get a lot of people come to our stuff and get an opportunity to try, kind of like before they buy, and they see how sincere we are about their safety and about sharing information. And so that's a lot of it that we're doing right now. So
cool. Well, I will let you go, sir. Thank you so much for your time tonight. It went over, but I love talking to you, and always love chatting with you. And an hour and 20 minutes is a little bit over, but
well, and I got to get up early, so I am ready to. But listen, anytime I can help, please just reach out. Like I said, when we kind of chatted there, we're just really busy down here at times. But I want to come out because I like what y'all are doing, and I appreciate what you're doing. And we just need to make sure that the more of us that are doing this, the more of us that are getting the word out, the more we're going to see the changes. And I'd like to see it where churches are not considered soft targets anymore. Sure. That they're hardened because of just the membership, and not because we put turrets with 50 calibers in them, but we, sure. It's because we're alert and watching for the wolves that would like to devour us. So
cool. All right. Thank you, sir. Take care. We'll be praying for your wife, and hopefully she can recover quickly.
Yeah, me too. So. I'm not good at caretaking. That's not my.
All right.
She might be. All right.
Take care. All right, guys. So I really appreciate. I'm just going to wrap up here real quick. I really appreciate Jim joining me, and definitely went a little bit longer than I thought. But one thing I did want to mention is that we actually, the next 2 weeks, we won't be doing Facebook Live. We'll actually start the first Sunday in January. So we're going to take a little bit of a break and try and get regrouped a little bit for 2020. We've got some great folks that we're lining up to do interviews with, to talk with, to be supportive. and that's been a great blessing. But please, the next couple of weeks, keep Paul and I in your prayers. 2020 is looking like a crazy year. I mean, we've just had a lot of doors open, a lot of things pop up, and we've kind of looked at them and said, you know what, maybe this is what God wants us to do, and maybe we can aid churches and we can help more churches in the Midwest. And so I'm really excited. I'm pumped up about next year. Because I think it'll hold a lot, and there's a lot going on. But we're actually talking about the possibility of traveling and getting stuff set up to go out to individual churches and help you guys. We're also in talks about the possibility of setting up a podcast that has a lot of potential, and just has some great opportunities there. So I feel like God's opening some great doors. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Take care, be blessed, have a great holiday season, and we'll talk to you in 2020.